Our God is sovereign. Anybody disagree with that?
Nope.
Because that fact that our God is sovereign will get you through times of trouble and struggle and trial that you couldn't get through any other way. This week, I attended one of the most heart-wrenching funerals I've ever had to attend. Pretty much everybody here knows, I don't think the folk on the internet know, that Barney Johnson's granddaughter, and of course we all love Barney Johnson here, Barney's granddaughter, who is a severe asthmatic, a couple of weeks ago had a coughing fit and her airway constricted, and she began to throw up as she coughed, and she asphyxiated. And her brain was without oxygen for over an hour by the time they got her to the hospital, and brain function never returned. And so after a week of waiting and deliberating, they decided to turn off the machines and let her go last weekend, and they decided to donate her organs. And so she passed last Saturday, and the funeral was on Tuesday. So I went to the funeral, and I went thinking that it would be a good idea to go hold up my friend's hands because he had decided he was going to preach his granddaughter's eulogy. Tough task. And so I thought I was going to go and hold up his hands and minister to my friend. And instead, he ministered to me. There are too many wet eyes in this room right now for me to get all the way through everything I want to tell you this morning. So it might become a bit of an emotional struggle, but trust me when I tell you that you want to hear this. Because Barney stood up in front of a church full of people with the body of his 4-year-old granddaughter laying in a casket in front of him. And what are you going to say? What are you going to say to people? You're going to stand up there and say she was a nice girl and people liked her and she always had a big smile. That's all true. She was a wonderful, lovable little girl. Does that bring any comfort to anybody? Does that help anybody feel better about what happened? No, that just increases the pain. And you've got a room full of people who are asking questions, good questions, legitimate questions like why? Barney in his sermon said at one point, I was in my car and I just said, God, take me. Take whatever brain function I have and give it to her. Why her? Why would you let her go? She should have this whole long life ahead of her. Take me, don't take her. Heart-wrenching funeral. And what Barney said for the next 12 minutes was one of the best sermons I ever heard. So, I memorized as much of it as I possibly could because I said, everybody needs to hear this. And I got in the car and I dialed Andrew Doss down in Atlanta. And I said, Andrew, you got a minute? He said, yeah. I said, okay, 12. You got 12 minutes? And I recited it to him as well as I could to try to plant it in my own mind because I never want to forget it. So, with a little grace, I'm going to tell you what Barney said. Because it was brilliant, and because it put the focus exactly where it was supposed to be. And when he got done, everybody in that church felt better because they knew God was sovereign. And there was a mix of folks there. The funeral took place in an Armenian church, and there was an Armenian pastor who spoke for a little bit and tried to reassure folks by telling them that she had not yet reached the age of accountability, and therefore we could have confidence that she had gone on to heaven. No such thing in the Bible. When you know there's no such thing in the Bible, there's no comfort in that. When people are hurting, when people are aching, when people are devastated by the death of a 4-year-old, unbiblical concepts don't help them. There's only one thing that can help them, and that's to know that God is sovereign. It's the only thing that's going to help them. So, after a few personal comments, Barney said, well, I have to back up slightly for just a moment. Saturday, when the decision was made to turn off the machines and let her go, Barney called me, and we were on the phone talking, and as he was talking, he said, the Lord gave me 2 words, and he said, I don't know where they're going yet, but I can't get rid of these 2 words. He said, and the 2 words are higher and grander. He said, and I know that that's going to be my sermon. He said, and I don't really know what yet, but I know it's higher and grander. And then just as we were talking, he said, hold on a minute, Jim. And then he said, I got to go talk to Derek. That's his son, the father of the child that died. He said, I've got to go talk to Derek. And I said, okay, you go. Obviously, you go talk to Derek. And we hung up. You need to know that backstory. So Barney stood up in front of that church full of people, a couple hundred people, and he said, higher and grander. And then he said, I want everybody here in this room to say these 2 words together, higher and grander. And they all said, higher and grander. And he said, now say it again, higher and grander. And he said, say it again, higher and grander. 7 times he had that funeral full of people say the words higher and grander until it was set in their minds and in their hearts, higher and grander. So then he took his Bible and he turned to the book of Matthew, and he read about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he read that 3 times Jesus went to his Father and said, if it were possible, remove this cup from me. And then he went back and talked to his disciples, and they were asleep, and he woke them up, and he said, stay and pray. And he went back again, and he said, Father, if it were possible, remove this from me. 3 times he asked, and then Barney, in very typical Barney fashion, those of you who know Barney will enjoy this comment, because Barney said, and you got to expect that if anybody could get a prayer through, Jesus could. If God's going to pay attention to any prayer, he's going to pay attention to his son praying to him, especially just before the atonement. Just before the key moment in all human history when the saints of God are going to be paid for and bought and redeemed. At that moment, he's praying to his Father, and you have to know his Father heard the prayer 3 times. Remove this if it were possible. And the Father said, no. Why? Because the Father had something higher and grander in mind. And then he turned to the book of Luke and he read where Christ resurrected. And then he read where Christ raised up into heaven and sits at the right hand of God, there to